So the other interesting thing is that in the US, probably produced half of the global thin film in 2007. My personal nationality biases aside, thin film to date really has been a US story. But I don't think that that's, while I think there are reasons that is, that is not a complete story. And the real complete story is that thin film is now becoming an everybody business. And what I mean by that is well, for starters, this is our ranking of the top 15 producers globally in 2007. What you can see in some of these, there's a little pointer if you can see it, is you can see the rankings in 2007. You can also see the rankings in 2006, and by looking at the difference between the two, you can tell how fast companies grew vis-a-vis their competitors. Obviously, First Solar, the largest thin film company in the world, saw the most fantastic growth in terms of from 2006 to 2007. But the story that we're going to begin to see, and the one that I think SolarPlaza has put together today, is that thin film is now becoming an everybody business. Excuse me. The Q-Cells is here presenting today and has, I can't even keep track with how many different thin film plays that are available in the Q-Cells portfolio and companies that they've partnered with. I try, but it's a full-time job trying to keep up with that. Sharp is here to present today on a rather astounding shift in their business model. And while I think Sharp probably still believes in the crystalline silicon path to grid parity, I believe that they're also have suggested with their recent announcements that thin film is going to be a major portion of their portfolio as well. Suntech has announced thin film capacity. Many of the rest of the companies in this top list have, and there are a lot of companies not on this list that, given their projected growth rates, could very well be pure play thin film companies on this list in the next 2 or 3 years. This is pretty exciting stuff. We haven't seen this kind of change out. The last change out we saw in terms of the top producers really was the rise of the Chinese and Taiwanese producers over the last 3 or 4 years. But in the next few years, this list is going to be fundamentally changed by the penetration of thin film manufacturing. What are the forces driving it? Standardized incentives around the world are dropping. This chart's a little hard to read, except that you can see everything sort of down and to the right. And what this chart attempted to do in a study that we did was try to figure out who had the best incentives when you adjust for currencies, when you adjust for the amount of sun in various locations, and the rebates and incentives, whatever economic support was available in the various countries for the different programs. This is a fun chart. You can spend hours talking about the nuances of the various programs and why France seems like a great program, except most of that is tied up in the BIPV, and that actually their standard program is about the same as Ontario's, which is a good program. It's just not quite as good as it looks at first blush. So there's lots of interesting nuances about whether, and the degree to which these will drive volume in those markets. But that's the demand conference, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. The important thing is that these incentives are dropping. And dropping incentives has a disproportionate impact on driving demand to thin film technologies. It really is, and we'll have a slide in a little bit that shows the real cost and price advantage of thin film versus crystalline. But just know that this is an effect that drives specifically to thin film demand. This is an incredibly hard chart to read from probably back in the back, but this is the way that we aggregate up all of our supply forecasts. And this is where you can see our aggregate supply forecast through 2010. Now, this is a mid-year update. This doesn't incorporate our latest thinking on polysilicon and thin film Our most recent polysilicon forecast through 2012 was just completed in the last couple of weeks, and our new thin film forecast will be completed in the next couple of weeks. So we haven't incorporated these, but these are relatively close. They're within 10 to 15% of what we believe that the real supply will be in 2010, and we have now forecast that through 2012. You can see that as a percentage of total capacity, or production capacity, you've got 27% is thin film, up from under 10% in 2006 and around 5% in about 2004 or 2003. So there's clearly disproportionate growth in the thin film technologies. If you take the bottom of that prior chart and you move it to the top of the next chart, you can compare that to demand, and we have a whole separate thing where we add up our demand forecasts and we shock that for different high and low demand scenarios and look at the price responsiveness of different demand scenarios. We're actually showing, I think what Edwin was alluding to in some of his earlier comments, is that we think that there's a lot of capacity coming on in the next couple of years. Surprise. And that's going to have a dramatic price impact on the market, that prices are actually going to have to fall faster than even the aggregate rebate levels, which are slated in Germany to fall somewhere between 8 and 9% each year. Spain still in question how quickly and how much of a step function that's going to be. The United States may fall 100% if the Congress can't get its act together. Let's just say I'm not betting on Congress. But we do show that there will be a pretty severe price response sometime in the late 2008 to 2010 timeframe. These numbers are debated hotly among a lot of people, and these are our forecasts. I think we could spend lots. Edwin's not going to give me enough time, but I'm right, and everyone else is probably wrong. It shows some margin compression through there, but margin compression for the traditional manufacturing companies. We'll get to where the margins are for the thin film on the other side, because what we're seeing is that perhaps at some of the costs that we're going to talk about today, less than $1 a watt manufacturing costs, over this time frame, the margins may in fact increase, or they may hold steady in the thin film side of the business as companies go from single-digit megawatts of production capacity to hundreds of megawatts to perhaps gigawatts. There is some scale that can be, and some scale economies that can be achieved. So I want to run real quickly. This is our Thin Film Report 2008. We track 135 thin film companies. The report will be available late in July, and it shows what you might imagine. All these companies or all the technologies are going to increase penetration, but I think the interesting part is in the nuance of who and where and why. We have the forecast out to 2012, but it required a new estimation methodology on our part because really people don't announce factory expansions out beyond 2010 with any certainty. So we really needed to think about how successful companies would grow. When we did the report originally in 2007, First Solar only had about 280 or 300 megawatts of projected capacity. By the end of last year, we given where their forecasts and their planned announcements had gone, our original forecast looked pretty silly. But we aren't usually in the business of estimate, or hadn't been in the business of estimating expansions beyond what companies announce. Usually we're trying to scale back what people are announcing and to get to the real number, not adding to the numbers. But we had to change our methodology to account for that because of the dynamic growth of thin film.